Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. The very last topic that Aristotle is going to examine in the Poetics, at least in what we have of the text, is this question about whether epic or tragic mimesis is actually better or superior to the other, beltion in Greek. So which of these two very important elevated artistic forms is the better one? And he's going to decide in the end that it's actually tragedy. And he's going to give us some interesting arguments. He's going to tell us that what we really should be thinking about is which one is superior through greater success, you can say, in achieving its goal, to telus to hanusa, arriving at its goal, fulfillment, perfection, however we want to translate that. It's telos. But he begins by considering an argument that he actually thinks is plausible, but off base. And this is really quite interesting. So it's a point of view that there's something to, but it's ultimately mistaken because it's looking at things in the wrong way. So there is an argument that is being made here for the superiority of epic poetry. What is it? Well, if the less vulgar, in Greek, the term there is fortike, right? So low class, you could say. If the less vulgar art is better or superior, beltion, right? And this art, the less vulgar art, the superior art, is addressed to a better or superior audience. Well, then the art which represents everything is going to be vulgar. And represents is, mimesis, right? In a verbal form, the one that depicts, the one that provides things for the audience. It spells it out for them, you might say, right? So epic is going to be higher class than tragedy, which is for those plebs, those ordinary people. And now why would he say that tragedy is in some way lower class? Well, he gives you some more of this argument. He says, in the belief that the spectators don't notice anything unless the performer stresses it, they engage in profuse movement, so very broad movement. And he talks about all those players rolling around to represent a discus and mauling the chorus leader if their music concerns Scylla. So Scylla was this creature with many arms, right? So you're mauling the chorus leader to depict that. And you can say, well, that would be a little bit ridiculous, rolling around to depict a discus. And so, tragedy indulges in that sort of stuff, although we could say comedy probably does as well. Epic, no, it's just somebody reciting the verses. You listen to them, you put pictures in your head, so you don't need it all right there in your face. And the idea here is that, epic is for decent people, epiekes in Greek, decent spectators, theata, the people who are watching. Tragedy, it's going to be more appealing to the masses, but that's because it is for vulgar people. And so he says that tragedy is for crude spectators. And so if tragedy is vulgar, well, then it must be in an inferior art. So you could say, here's the structure of the argument, here's the evidence for it, and the conclusion is epic is better than tragedy. And then Aristotle says, oh, hold on there a minute. Let's actually look at this argument carefully. He's got several different responses. So the first one is he says, well, you got to make a distinction here. This applies to the acting, tes hypokrites, literally to the actor, but not to the poetry itself, tes poetics, right? So if we're going to criticize tragedy because it is appealing to a vulgar common audience, it's not because of tragedy itself, it's because of the way the actors are choosing to do things. It doesn't have to be done in such a crude, vulgar way. The next response that he's going to give is another distinction. Do we need to get rid of movement altogether? Movement is kinesis, right? Movement in the broadest sense. And the answer is no, we don't have to get rid of or reject, or as the translation here, eschew, a term that we don't really use very much anymore. We don't have to get rid of all of the movement, and he says any more than we even have to get rid of all of the dancing, which would appear to be a kind of vulgar thing as well. So he says, eta ouda kinesis, not all the movement, hapasa, apodoki mastea, needs to be rejected, but just the vulgar sorts. So you can do movement, but you don't need to be contorting yourself in all sorts of weird gestures or doing things that are very, very big and broad, right? You can do it in a refined way. And then finally, he says, tragedy can produce its effect without movement, just like epic can, through what? Through actually reading it. Now, reading doesn't mean opening up a book and looking in it, or at that time, unrolling a scroll. He means somebody actually reading or reciting it. You can appreciate good tragedy. Maybe that's a sign of crappy tragedy. It doesn't work unless you've got the actors doing all sorts of goofy stuff. You can appreciate good tragedy, as we so often do, just hearing it or reading it aloud, right? So this argument doesn't really work. It doesn't say yet whether tragedy is better than epic. And that's why Aristotle is going to go on to give us some other considerations, some other arguments. So he is going to give us four essentially, right? The first one is that whatever epic has, tragedy also has that. So that would make them roughly equal, right? Whatever resources, so plot, tragedy, epic has that. It has characters. It has thoughts, dianoia. It has diction or, style, however we're going to translate lexis. It's got those four components, but tragedy, as we see earlier on in the work, has two other main components: melos, music, song, however you want to translate that, and opsis, spectacle, which includes everything from moving around on stage to the scene painting that Sophocles introduced, and other aspects like that. So this is an argument saying, listen, you get everything that this has, plus there's more, as the old TV commercials used to run. So that's one good argument. Another one, tragedy has vividness and arges, right? It possesses this capacity to bring things before the eyes in two different modes, both in reading and in, we could say, if we want to be very literal, in deeds, in actions, or performance is another way of translating this, right? It's got enarges, kai ente, anagnose, the reading of it, kai epi ton ergon, the things that are being related to us, right? So that's the second one. Then we also see tragedy achieves the goal, the telos, of mimesis in a shorter scope, in literally less time than does epic. Epic is a little bit more drawn out. Tragedy is concentrated, you could say. And he says that greater concentration is more pleasurable than dilution over a long period. And he says, imagine if somebody were to take Sophocles' Oedipus in as many hexameters as the Iliad, right? It really wouldn't work. The Iliad is a nice long poem. The Oedipus Rex can be done fairly quickly, right? And then lastly, he says the mimesis of epic poetry is less unified, or quite literally less one. Hechon mia. Mia means one. Hechon, less, than we have in tragedy. And this is very connected with the other one that we just noted. Why? Well, he says that a sign of this is that any epic yields several tragedies. You can take an epic and turn it into a couple different episodes that furnish you with a tragedy. If they compose a single plot, it will seem truncated or diluted. And so, the Iliad and the Odyssey have a lot of different parts, and they're great. He actually thinks that Homer is the best. But these poems are structured as well could be and are close as possible to mimesis of a single action, which means that they're closer to tragedy than other epics. So all of these four considerations go on to show us that tragedy attains the goals of good, elevated mimesis even better than does epic. It's not as if epic is bad, but tragedy is better. And so this is Aristotle's position on this very interesting and I would say complicated question.